For the past 10 months, WikiLeaks has been dealing with a financial blockade. You have companies including Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, and even Western Union denying funds being transferred to the WikiLeaks website. So what does this mean for the long-term implications for the website? It's something that the mainstream media hasn't talked about too much. You see maybe a couple articles about it in the New York Times, but it's something that we should focus on because it has to do with our civil liberties and our First Amendment rights. Here to talk to us a little bit about this is Ilona Minkovsky from RT's The Ilona Show. Ilona, thank you so much for joining us today. And first, I want to start off with something that seems very obvious to us, but just so it's clear for our audience, how legal is this?
Well, first of all, Anna, thanks for having me on. And the unfortunate thing is that this is very legal. That's the whole thing, right, about calling it a financial blockade, because if you think about it, Visa, PayPal, MasterCard, Western Union, these are all private companies. And so as private companies, they can basically do whatever they want. And, 10 months ago, this happened in December of 2010. Originally, they tried to go on some kind of technicalities, say that there were some terms of service that WikiLeaks hadn't abided by. But at the end of the day, we found out that indeed people like Joe Lieberman and other members of Congress were calling these companies and putting pressure on them so that they would cut off the funding. And so what you have is just a financial blockade that's been put on by private companies, but they happen to control, I think, about 96%. That's what a report in The Guardian said yesterday. 96% of this market. So they've made it virtually impossible for people to donate money to WikiLeaks. And Julian Assange has now said that they've lost 95% of their revenue because of it.
They have lost 95% of their revenue. Back in 2010, it cost about $500,000 for them to operate, and they received more funds than they needed to operate. So right now they're running on their financial reserves, but those are quickly running out. So my question to you, Ilona, is what type of precedent does this send when you have companies like Visa and MasterCard picking and choosing and making decisions as to what you can spend your own money on?
Well, I think that it sets a very dangerous precedent, a very bad one, especially for the freedom of speech. And that's why people are rightly so upset about this, And it doesn't matter whether you think that you support WikiLeaks or not, and whether you support what they do or not, because as we know, obviously, WikiLeaks is something that's a little bit divisive out there. But you just have to look at the broader precedent that this sets, which is that if there's an organization that you want to donate money to, you may not be able to do that and use your freedom of speech because the company decided not to. One of the arguments that WikiLeaks always uses too is that you can donate money through PayPal to the KKK, but you can't do it to WikiLeaks. And so if you think about that, what else we see here is that horrible collusion between government and between big business. These are the things that Occupy Wall Street is fighting, maybe in a little bit of a different form, but government pressure now, because the government can't legally do it. They obviously can't legally restrict free speech and tell you where to put your money where you can't. But because they can make all the phone calls, because they have all the connections, because they can apply that pressure, they now can essentially silence anyone they want without having to necessarily do it themselves and get their fingers dirty.
You're absolutely right about what you say with Occupy Wall Street. Maybe the protesters at Occupy Wall Street aren't specifically talking about this issue, but this really plays into the grand scheme of things, where you have financial institutions that are more powerful, that have more authority than politicians and people that we've elected into Congress. So, you mentioned that Joe Lieberman has pressured these companies to stop funding WikiLeaks. Has the Obama administration said anything about this at all?
You know what? Not that I've seen. I have only noticed that the Obama administration has been incredibly silent about this, because the Obama administration, of course, wants to act like they're staying out of it. We know that for a really long time, President Obama refused to ever comment on Bradley Manning and on his conditions when he was still being held at Quantico. And then he finally did, and he kind of, half-assed it and just said, well, I spoke to the people at the Pentagon, and they assured me that everything was okay. So I really think that the Obama administration wants to act like they're very hands-off here. They also don't want to, draw any attention to WikiLeaks unless it's negative attention, right? The stuff that the press loves when it comes to Julian Assange and his personal problems, the other lawsuits against him where, may or may not be a rape case. But what WikiLeaks has done is WikiLeaks has embarrassed the U.S. government over and over again through the information that they've put out there. And so what they want them to do is they just want WikiLeaks to disappear. And because they haven't been able to actually charge them or convict them of any crime, it just happens to be so convenient that that now they're actually going broke because the government pressured private industry to to essentially shut them up by not allowing people to donate anymore and keep the operation afloat.
Now, I hear that Julian Assange is trying to find other ways to raise revenue so he can keep his website afloat. Have you heard anything about that? There was something about a private auction that was taking place.
You know, I'm actually not too firm with the details in terms of the private auction. I've seen, of course, some, some conservative people out there even mocking the idea that, oh, I'm sure that they're going to have a telethon now and all the liberals in the world that are supporting WikiLeaks are going to donate their money. I know that he's trying to find some legal methods, at least in Europe and here in the U.S., something about an antitrust suit to see if they can get around this. And that's why they've shut their doors for now. As Julian Assange said, that until November 28th, what they're going to do is focus on fighting this financial blockade and finding, every option that might be out there. But they already said that into 2012, if whatever options that they, that they try out don't actually work, they don't know if the organization is still going to be able to keep running.
Yeah, this is really depressing news. And as I mentioned, it's not something that you see on television when you're watching the mainstream media. They're not talking about this at all. At the same time, our First Amendment rights are really being jeopardized here. What do you think the future holds for this particular situation? Do you think that this is something that will maybe gain some traction among Occupy protesters, and maybe they'll, make this issue very apparent to politicians, and maybe they can actually do something about it? Do you see are you optimistic when it comes to the future of this issue? I'm optimistic in the sense that I think that people are now paying attention, right? And even if, I think that it would be unfortunate if WikiLeaks were to have to shut its doors and, cease existing because they ran out of funding. But I think that WikiLeaks has already started something, it's really catapulted some kind of a transparency movement into action. And you can even see this with Anonymous, with LulzSec, with Anti-Sec, some of the other hacking groups that are out there that are trying to put other information. And, they don't always do it properly. I don't always agree with the way that they're doing it, but I think that there is a larger desire right now for transparency out there. And this is definitely something that Occupy Wall Street can get behind. I don't know if they're actually going to, because we know that this is an organization and a collective where there are a lot of different requests. There's no specific demands. They want it to stay that way. But this really hits at the very core of the issue, which is this collusion, like I said, again, between corporations, between the financial industry, and between the government, and the fact that they can do whatever they want in their, in their bubble that controls the world at the top, and everybody else just has to suffer, and we have no say. And so I think that there's definitely a lot of anger that's going to continue in that sense. All right, Ilona Minkovsky, a pleasure to talk to you as always. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for having me on.